There is a river in northern Italy. It is not wide. It is not dramatic. And if you walked past it today, you might not even notice it. But on the night of January 10th, 49 BC, this quiet river became the most dangerous place in the Roman world. Because on one side of the river stood a Roman general, and on the other side stood the future of Rome. His name was Julius Caesar. For 9 years, Caesar had been far from the city of Rome. He had been fighting wars in the north, in the land the Romans called Gaul. Today, that region is mostly France and Belgium. There he won battles that made him famous across the Roman world. His soldiers trusted him. His enemies feared him. But power in Rome always came with danger. The more successful a man became, the more people wanted to bring him down. In Rome, Caesar's political rivals began to spread a new story about him. They said Caesar was too powerful. They said he wanted to become king. And in Rome, that was the most dangerous accusation of all. So the Senate gave him an order. Disband your army. Return to Rome. Stand trial. For most people, that might sound reasonable. But for Caesar, it was something else entirely. It was a trap. To understand why this moment mattered, we need to go back 9 years. When Caesar first went north to Gaul, he was not yet the most powerful man in Rome. He had great ambition, but he also had serious problems. He was deeply in debt. Roman politics was expensive. Candidates paid for public games, festivals, and gifts to the people. Caesar had spent enormous sums building his career. Gaul offered him something he desperately needed. Opportunity. War brought victory. Victory brought wealth. And wealth brought power. Over the next 9 years, Caesar conquered almost all of Gaul. He defeated powerful tribes, crossed the Rhine into German territory, and even launched expeditions to Britain. These victories made him one of the most famous generals in Rome. But Caesar was not only a soldier. He understood something else about power. Story. During his campaigns, he wrote a book about the war, Commentari de Bello Gallico. The writing was clear and simple, almost like a report. But it was also brilliant political messaging. Caesar was shaping how people in Rome saw him. And he used a very unusual technique. Instead of writing I, Caesar wrote about himself in the third person. Caesar marched. Caesar decided. Caesar attacked. The style sounded calm and objective, almost like a historian describing events. But in reality, Caesar was doing something very clever. He was writing the story of his own rise. Meanwhile, politics in Rome were changing. One of Caesar's former allies had become his rival, the powerful general Pompey. Pompey now stood with the Senate. And slowly, the political pressure against Caesar began to grow. At the center of this crisis was one rule, a rule that had protected the Roman Republic for centuries. No Roman general was allowed to bring his army into Italy. The Romans feared one thing above all, a military commander seizing power by force. So the law was clear. When a general finished his command, he had to dismiss his army before returning to Rome. Only then could he enter the city as a private citizen. But this rule created a dangerous problem. As long as a general commanded an army, he had something extremely valuable: immunity. In Roman law, this meant political protection. His enemies could not prosecute him in court. But the moment he dismissed his soldiers, that protection disappeared. And this is the trap Caesar faced. If he returned to Rome without his army, his enemies could immediately put him on trial. For a Roman aristocrat, a public trial was not just a legal risk. It could destroy everything: career, reputation, honor. Romans had a word for personal honor: dignitas. Losing it meant political ruin. For Caesar, returning to Rome without protection would have been something close to political suicide. Caesar offered a compromise. He said he would give up his command if Pompey did the same. The Senate refused. Instead, they declared that if Caesar did not obey their order, he would be considered an enemy of the state. So Caesar marched south, toward the border of Italy, toward a small river called the Rubicon. North of that river lay a Roman province. South of it lay Italy itself, the heart of the Republic. On one side of the Rubicon, Caesar was still a victorious Roman general. The moment he crossed it with an army, he would become something else. A rebel, an outlaw. And once that step was taken, there would be no going back. Caesar stopped at the river's edge. It was night. The water was quiet. The current was slow. In the darkness, there was nothing dramatic about the Rubicon. It was small, unremarkable, the kind of river a traveler might cross without thinking. But Caesar was not a traveler. He stood there for a long time. Not because he was afraid. Caesar had faced death too many times for fear to stop him now. He was thinking about something different. Once he gave the order, his soldiers would cross. And the moment their feet touched the other side, there would be no version of events where this had not happened. No negotiation could undo it. No apology could reverse it. The Senate would not see a general returning home. They would see an invader. Later, the historian Suetonius recorded the words Caesar spoke before crossing. Alea iacta est. The die is cast. Like a gambler who has already released the dice, Caesar was no longer in control of where they would land. He gave the order. His army crossed the river, and Rome would never be the same. What happened next surprised everyone. Caesar marched south with a single legion, around 5,000 men, against the capital of the most powerful empire in the world, and the cities stepped aside. Not because they loved Caesar, some did, but many simply looked at what was coming and made a quiet calculation. Fighting meant dying. Waiting meant surviving. Town after town opened its gates. In Rome itself, panic spread through the Senate. Men who had spent years demanding Caesar's arrest now found themselves asking a different question. Where were the soldiers to stop him? The answer was uncomfortable. There were almost none. Roman tradition had kept large armies out of Italy for generations. The Republic feared military power near the capital. It was a wise rule, until the moment it wasn't. Pompey, Caesar's greatest rival, faced an impossible choice. He had the Senate's support. He had his reputation, but he did not have enough men to hold the city. So he left. He crossed the Adriatic and sailed east, planning to raise a larger army from Rome's provinces. Some called it strategy. Some called it abandonment. But one fact was now impossible to deny. Caesar had crossed a river with 5,000 men, and Rome had no answer. The final confrontation between Caesar and Pompey came in 48 BC near the Greek town of Pharsalus. At first glance, Pompey seemed certain to win. His army was much larger. He had more infantry, more cavalry, and the support of many Roman senators. Caesar's army was smaller and had been campaigning for years. But numbers are not everything in war. Caesar understood something about soldiers. His men had followed him for nearly a decade. They had fought beside him in Gaul. They had crossed the Rubicon with him. For them, defeat meant disaster. If they lost, they could not simply return to normal life. They had already chosen their side. They fought with something powerful: desperation. Pompey's army, on the other hand, included many wealthy supporters of the old political order. They believed their larger numbers would guarantee victory. But confidence is not always the same as determination. During the battle, Caesar's experienced soldiers held their ground. When Pompey's cavalry attempted to outflank them, Caesar had already prepared a counterattack. The move surprised Pompey's forces. Soon, the larger army began to lose its cohesion. What had seemed like an easy victory slowly turned into defeat. By the end of the battle, Pompey's army was broken. The civil war had effectively been decided. Pompey fled the battlefield and escaped to Egypt. There, the young ruler Ptolemy XIII ordered his assassination, hoping to gain favor with Caesar. When Caesar later arrived in Egypt and was shown Pompey's severed head, ancient sources say he reacted with shock. The man he had defeated had once been his ally. But the consequences of crossing the Rubicon could no longer be undone. After the victory at Pharsalus, Julius Caesar became the most powerful man in the Roman world. His enemies had been defeated. His army was loyal. And for the first time in generations, one man held enormous influence over the Roman state. For the next few years, Caesar ruled Rome. He introduced several reforms. He reorganized the government, settled thousands of soldiers in new colonies, and expanded Roman citizenship. One of his most famous reforms involved time itself. In 46 BC, Caesar introduced a new calendar. It was called the Julian calendar. And the system we use today is still based on that reform. But power in Rome was always dangerous. Many senators believed Caesar had gone too far. Some feared that he wanted to become king. To Romans, that word carried deep fear. Centuries earlier, the Roman people had overthrown their kings and created the Republic. The idea of a king returning to Rome was almost unthinkable. So a group of senators formed a conspiracy. They believed that killing Caesar would save the Republic. On March 15, 44 BC, a date remembered as the Ides of March, they attacked him during a meeting of the Senate. More than 20 men surrounded him. According to ancient sources, Caesar was stabbed 23 times. The conspirators called themselves liberators. They believed they had saved Rome. But history would judge the moment very differently. After Caesar's death, Rome did not return to peace. Instead, the Republic fell into another cycle of civil wars. New alliances formed. Old rivalries returned. Out of this chaos rose a young man named Augustus. Augustus was Caesar's adopted son and political heir. Over time, he defeated his rivals and consolidated power. But Augustus did something very different from Caesar. He did not openly declare himself king. Instead, he slowly reshaped the Roman system around himself. The Republic still existed in name, but real power now belonged to one man. The Roman Empire had begun. In a strange way, the men who killed Caesar helped create the very future they feared. By trying to stop one powerful leader, they opened the door to an empire that would last for centuries. Roman law, Roman roads, Roman language, and Roman political ideas would shape much of the world that followed. And the chain of events that created that empire began with a single decision beside a small river. Today, the phrase, crossing the Rubicon, has a clear meaning in English. It describes a decision that cannot be reversed. A point of no return. But the phrase carries another idea as well. Risk. When someone crosses the Rubicon, they are not making an ordinary choice. They are committing to something serious. A decision with high stakes. A moment when the consequences could change everything. You might hear the phrase in business. A company invests millions of dollars in a new project. At that moment, they have crossed the Rubicon. There is no easy way back. You might hear it in politics, when a leader makes a bold decision that reshapes the future of a country. Or in personal life. Someone leaves a secure job to pursue a different path. Someone moves to a new country. Someone makes a commitment that will define the rest of their life. In all these cases, the meaning is the same. The choice has been made. The past cannot return, and the future begins from that moment. Interestingly, historians today are not even completely certain which modern river was the original Rubicon. Over the centuries, rivers changed their courses, and names disappeared from maps. The famous river that changed Roman history may have been little more than a small stream, but the idea it represents became immortal. Every life contains moments like this. Not with armies, not with empires, but with decisions. There are times when we stand at the edge of something new. A new opportunity, a difficult conversation, a path that will change who we are. In those moments, we often know one thing clearly. Once we step forward, we cannot return to the old version of our lives. That is what makes a Rubicon moment. More than 2,000 years ago, a Roman general stood beside a quiet river and faced such a choice. Whether he truly spoke the famous words or not, the phrase that history remembers captures the meaning perfectly. The die is cast. That is the story of crossing the Rubicon and why this ancient moment still lives in the English language today. If you are learning English, think about this phrase in your own life. Have you ever faced a decision that felt like a Rubicon moment? A moment when you knew that once you acted, everything would change? You might even have experienced one in your English learning journey. Learning a new language often begins with a step like that. A step that feels uncertain at first, but opens the door to a new world. Thank you for listening to Ancient Stories in English, and I will see you in the next story.